Hi, everybody, and thank you for joining us at SMX Next. I hope you've gotten a lot from the session so far. In this session, I'm going to be teaching you about the new best practices or how to navigate this weird, wild AI-powered PPC world without sacrificing too much control. First, a quick introduction to myself for those who don't know me. My name's Aaron Levy. I'm an evangelist for Optmyzr, where we affectionately say our job is to make marketers' lives easier through technology. A lot of people probably know me from my past roles working in agency life, where unfortunately my career can almost buy beer. But I've overseen billions of dollars in paid search spend over the year. And at Optmyzr, we were fortunate enough to be recognized with a number of awards. Now, I'm going to start this by saying I actually lied. I'm not going to talk about best practices. And I'm also going to recycle a really old Allen Iverson joke. It's supposed to be the best, and we're in here talking about best practices. Best practices are the worst. And I'm using an AI joke mostly because my friend wore a t-shirt the other day to bowling and I couldn't stop laughing at it. So AI is coming for your jobs. I promise this is the last dad joke. That might also be a lie too. But why do I hate best practices so much? Best practices as a phrase to me it's lazy. It's a really lazy answer for those of us who don't want to think when asked the question. Best practices are average. Best practices are table stakes. As fall is coming on, it is getting to be a little bit basic out there. I also want to give a huge credit to my friend, Michelle Merklin, who I used to work with at Tenuity, who brought the attention of the word simple to my mind. Very often when we're hearing about AI strategies, Google or other partners will say how simple it is to get it set up. Creating something simple is darn near impossible. So simple to me is a little bit of a dangerous word. To have something properly prepared for AI, honestly, not that simple. It's extremely difficult and takes a lot of work. So let's just go ahead and get those two phrases out of our vocabulary. We're going to get rid of best practices and we're going to get rid of simple. Instead, what I'm going to show you throughout is some ideas, some inspiration from a lot of data that we've seen over about 15,000 accounts, and give you some suggestions or start points where you can then take and deploy your own best practices. So I'm going to start going through some results from the PPC survey that my friend Wienan Meyer runs from TrueClicks. I apologize because I probably said your name incorrectly despite trying to learn how to do it. But so despite all these simple best practices that are coming out, advertisers seem to find that PPC is getting harder. About half the respondents think paid search is getting harder than it has in the past. Decreased insights from our black box campaign types, which they're not that black box, but whatever, we like saying that. Waning control that comes from automation, the death of keywords that we've grown to love over all these years, and of course, volatile automated bidding. Increased competition and rising CPCs, which frankly, we're not going to go into a ton in this presentation, but as I'm sure you all know, it's a tough economy out there. When is it not? And so in turn, people are trying some crazy things to make sure that they can hit their goals. And then, of course, again, not going to cover in depth in this presentation, but something that I feel like every advertiser has to be really aware of. But the ongoing privacy challenges with GDPR, iOS updates, meaning that all of our Apple data is modeled and we have to just trust Google, cookie depreciation, you name it. There's a lot of stuff that's changing. Is it harder or easier? I personally am not sure, but it certainly is changing. Now, that said, automation is generally viewed as a positive thing by search marketers. Survey results from this showed that 80% of people are in favor of Ads Editor, which is no surprise because that's all. But really a lot of data integrations, and particularly with external tools, Link, people are very happy with those and the increased ability to feed your data into Google to make sure that they're optimizing towards your business data. People are in big favor of that. I think there was a little bit of a surprise in a good way was that people viewed PMAX pretty favorably. It's important to note that the survey results only favored PMAX with feed favorably, so e-commerce PMAX. But frankly, I think that the product is growing a lot, and we're going to talk about it more in depth a little bit later. Now, where we see bad robots, the areas where people are a little bit unsatisfied with what automation has happened. I agree with some and I disagree with some. The vast majority of advertisers don't like auto-applied recommendations. I am in line with them. That deploys Google's best practices over our own strategies, which I'm not a huge fan of. Drop match and demand gen, however, got beat up pretty hard in the survey, but I'm honestly a fan of both of them. You just have to look through them with a different lens. And again, we'll get into those a little bit more in depth later. But so with the table set and us kind of learning these things from what search marketers have said, we took a big look with our analyst team into what we saw across about 15,000 accounts in Optmyzr and saw what we learned and saw what was working the best in bulk. To give you a right idea, since so many people are going to ask about best practices, this can help serve as a good start point. So starting with bidding, probably the most important part of paid search, even more so than targeting. We took a deep look at all the different bidding strategies, what type of customers they can work for, or clients or campaigns, and figuring out why they might work best and where you should start to deploy them. So first things first, probably the most common question that I get from smaller to mid-size advertisers is, how many conversions do I need for a sound bid strategy? You're not going to like my answer. It's actually higher than what Google recommends. I believe that Google's documentation says 30 conversions over a 30-day period. Our data showed that performance really started to spike for automated bid types, primarily target. Things really start to perform really, really well and hum around 50 conversions over a 30-day period. That can be a lot for small advertisers. Success can happen at a lower threshold, particularly for targeting strategies, target bid strategies. But there is a lot more volatility, sort of the law of small numbers. And the same goes for manual bidding. I was kind of surprised by this and kind of not, but our advertisers who were running manual bidding and had lower conversion volume still struggled. The law of large numbers and the law of small numbers both function the same way. When you have a smaller set of data, there's going to be more volatility, whether you're pushing the buttons or AI is pushing them for you. Now, that said, I historically have been somewhat of an enterprise guy. I used to run the search team at Tenuity before I joined the squad here at Optmyzr, and we were primarily running with true enterprise accounts, 6-figure monthly spenders. It's been a bit of a shock for me as I'm working with a couple of accounts now that are good friends of mine that are much smaller in the $3,000 to $5,000 monthly spend range. And so these are the strategies that we saw worked through Optmyzr data, and frankly, the ones that I saw worked the best for myself. If you are using an automated bid strategy, we're generally seeing the most success with maximized strategies. Maximize conversions, maximize conversion value if you have that set up, or maximize clicks tends to work really well at a smaller volume. Now, you might be a little surprised why I'm suggesting maximize clicks. Like, Aaron, you're good at this. Aren't we supposed to be targeting conversions? Well, yes. But in my own experience, and frankly, what we've seen from across a lot of accounts, smaller accounts tend to have a more legacy structure, if you will, using mostly just keywords and traditional match types. And so think about it this way. If you already have your match types held in and you're getting good queries, getting more clicks on good queries, one can safely assume your conversion rate is going to stay the same. So while we won't necessarily want to target just clicks as a success metric, assuming you have your conversion tracking, your account set up correctly, maximizing clicks can be a good way to go at a smaller volume. And I found this myself as well. Now, that said, we'll just reiterate, the more conversion volume we can create, the better. And I'll talk about some ways that we can do that a little bit later as well. Should I use CPC bid caps? One of the most common complaints or rants that I see on LinkedIn is someone, posting a picture of a $200 click that they don't know what happened or it didn't convert. Like, oh my God, why is this happening? Like, well, the answer is because you're letting it. So we wanted to take a look and see if bid caps actually helped performance or not looking at CPCs specifically, but looking at the most important things like conversion and ROAS. Frankly, results were mixed, despite my little top hat on top of our thing. Bid caps don't always help as much as we think they might. They will save us from those fun ranty screenshots of a $200 click. But generally speaking, we saw that performance results were mixed. If people were using bid caps for max clicks or CPA-oriented strategies, kind of hit and miss. Results were, not a strong conclusion. ROAS bidding strategies and target impression share, however, is where bid caps tend to prove successful. And this makes sense to me, honestly. If you're an e-commerce company, you might get one big $10,000 order. That could skew Google and think, hey, this person's going to be another $10,000 order. Let me bid as high as humanly possible for them. Putting a little cap on it can help remove those outliers and target impression share, given that we're going for eyeballs. You know, we don't want our CPCs to be too high, given that we're just trying to get people to see our ads. What about lead gen? This was where I built the bulk of my career back in Tenuity. I was focused almost entirely on lead gen, and much of my career is there as well now. Yet, funny enough, lead gen advertisers tend to benefit a ton from doing value-based bidding strategies with TROAS. We had a lot more success in seeing advertisers who had something in there around lead value instead of just bidding to a target CPA. We saw they were a lot more successful when they could have something that was ROAS oriented. So making sure that you can figure out if a single conversion type is worth more than the other. The other thing that we don't see implemented a lot, but we've seen a lot of success with, is people implementing value rules for lead gen conversion. For example, say you're a plumber. Here in Philly, I live in South Philly, where my house is really small. So there's not a lot of pipes and the problems won't be very big. But if you go to some other neighborhoods, there might be a lot larger houses, potentially more wealthy individuals. So jobs might be worth more. So you might want to say a conversion in that particular area, a good zip code or a good town or whatever, it's worth 2 times what it is somewhere else. Would highly recommend doing that, especially if you have a lot of variability in where your leads come from and what performance looks like. Now, that said, one of the things that we really, really have to focus on is, are we giving AI the right goals and telling it to steer in the right places? It's an important challenge that seems very banal, like we figured it out at the very beginning and we don't have to change it again. That might not necessarily be true. So it's extremely important to have a proper conversion setup, and goal types really do matter. Google interprets them differently. So making sure that you set them up correctly and use the right one to make sure that you're bidding towards the right targets is essential. Remember, the primary goals are used for bid automation. Secondary goals are not really used for bidding. They're more for information, something for you to look at, see if a certain goal is hit, but they're not used towards bidding. So what I recommend, we talked about a little bit before about low volume campaigns and how we can struggle with those. So I would highly recommend, if you are struggling with volume and you do have a good read on your full funnel, set up conversions for every stage of the funnel and discount them depending on where the person is. It's a great way to get more conversion volume in there. You'll just have to monitor on the back end to make sure that the actual value of the conversions remain the same and that you're really improving your business metrics and not just making your conversions look a little higher in Google for smart bidding. And that said, I think something that people really struggle with is the actual value of their conversions. Again, we're thinking about lead gen businesses. There are a lot of different ways that people can contact your business. They can call you, they can email you, they can fill out a form, they can use an appointment scheduler, they can show up. And those sometimes can be very different values. So I found a lot of success with this strategy. In this particular example, numbers are made up, but frankly, kind of aligned with what I've seen over the years. Say a sale is worth $500. If people call you, they're 70% likely to convert from a lead to a sale. Because if they email you, maybe they're 20% likely. Do you want to set the same CPA target or the same value to something that is, math, 3.5 times better? Probably not. So this is another example of how you can use conversion steering to make sure that you're paying for what leads are actually worth and for what's the most meaningful to your business. Now, if you don't have a full data pass back, sending the actual value of the sale back to Google, if your conversion rag is too long, not a ton of success just using proxy values. Take a look at your CRM once or twice and see what the conversion rate is for each different lead type. And then you can set values accordingly. And that will help steer smart bidding towards conversion types or people who might be more likely to conduct a certain conversion type. It will help steal your automation so that Google's AI can make better decisions that are more valuable for the business. And when we're bidding based on ROAS, it's extremely difficult to get target ROAS. Yeah, that's perfectly right. From an obvious end, if you're bidding way too low, you're not going to get any conversions and you're just spending on next to nothing. But if you're bidding way too high, you might be spending too much for conversions that aren't necessarily profitable for you. Bid too low, you're leaving stuff on the table. So finding this layer right in the middle to set your target at, really, really important and really, really hard. A lot harder than it used to be for sure. Now you can figure this out by using some of the simulation tools that Google can provide you. I haven't gotten a chance to toy around with, I don't even remember what they call it, their investment planner or something like that. I haven't seen it show up in my accounts yet, but I assume things will function much the same. Budget Simulator, while not perfect like many other forecasting tools, you can use it to inform your bidding and try and figure out where that perfect sweet spot is right at the top of our little whale chart there. Now, as you increase spend, this may come as a surprise to some, maybe not, but ROAS tends to decrease. I would often have clients or CFOs or whoever saying, oh, can't we just spend more and get more stuff at the same price? Usually the answer is no. Sometimes yes, but usually the answer is no. You've already captured all of the best queries, all of the best clicks, all of the best people. So by increasing your bidding, you're inherently going to go a little bit wider, and the next clicks is always going to cost a little bit more than the last one did. So use Budget Simulator, and then that can help inform you what your incremental ROAS might be from either spending more or increasing your bids. So I will say that I came up with this metric. I don't know if I did or not, but I call it iROAS, the incremental ROAS on spending a little bit more or getting a little bit more traffic. Again, iROAS will likely diminish as spend goes up. So if you're spending another $100, it will not be as efficient as the last $100. And that might be okay, it might not. Depends if you're looking at things from a macro level, as in, is the account still hitting targets when we're getting a little bit more? Or from a micro level, are we making money on every single order that we're getting or every single lead that's coming in? It's up to you to determine how important these two are, but it's also really important for expectation setting when you're talking to either your customers, their bosses, your boss, whoever, that it's not as simple as just opening up the spigot and getting more volume and it'll perform the same. Again, take a look at the budget calculator, the budget forecast tool from Google. This chart that we have here is pulled directly from there. Of course, the numbers are approximate, but it can help to show you where, a break point might be that if you spent that much more money, you actually might not get that much more out of it. So use these tools that Google provides to help you set better bids and help drive their machine a little bit better. Another piece of feedback that we frequently get about AI is about the learning period. Some people might call it too slow. Some people might call it tuition, paying for things that we already know. In any case, I think there's some misconceptions that we need to clear up about Google's learning period to help you understand it a little bit better and understand what to expect. So if your campaign is in learning mode, it's not the worst thing in the world, and it's not like it's just flying blind. Smart bidding needs time to recognize patterns. It's just like Waymo going into a new city, which is exactly what's happened here in Philly. Right now, you can't book a Waymo in Philly, even though they've been driving around for a couple of months, because it's starting to learn how to recognize patterns, starting to figure out where problems are, and it's trying to figure out if it can navigate our little teeny tiny streets with weird names and numbers. Learning period is somewhat similar. You're going to deal with temporary inefficiencies, but it's not like it came from nowhere. It's still operating efficiently based on the knowledge that you've already have. So if you see that your campaigns are in permanent learning period, that doesn't mean the bid strategy is not working. It just means that you can expect a little bit more volatility until you come out of the learning period. Again, not to be a broken record, and I'm sorry to all you smaller spenders and niche businesses. Lower data volume tends to have a longer learning period. It has to struggle a little bit more in getting smart bidding going. I'm sorry. I didn't do it. I did talk about Waymo coming to Philly, and I have to chuckle with this because the last time a nationally recognized robot came to Philly, it didn't go well. I'm really excited to see how Philly deals with Waymos. And frankly, I think it's going to be the way that a lot of search advertisers feel about learning period, and that they are going to hate them and smash them. They haven't been smashed yet, but they probably will. I told you I wasn't done with dad jokes. Probably another one of the most common questions that I've been hearing or seeing is, how can you show ads in AI mode? And unfortunately, if you're in a legacy strategy, just using phrase and exact, it probably won't show up. But in this section, we're going to talk a little bit more about the maxes once we get beyond keywords. So I'm not going to go too crazy in depth into the match type study that we did. You can look at it on our blog. We took a look at it, and Brad Getty's just produced an epic blog post, both in length and quality, around match types. But really talking about it, it is mostly what we expected. Exact match delivered reliable, predictable high performance, even though it's not as exact as it used to be. Phrase match tended to retain relevancy a little bit better than broad match and added volume, not as efficient as exact match. Broad match was the widest net, which is not surprising because it's a little bit of, there's a learning involved with it. It has to figure things out. There is a learning period. But of course, it's necessary for showing your ads and AI prompts unless you want to use one of the maxes. So the best match type for you, entirely up to you. Again, there have been a giant myriad of studies about this, and I'm not going to go into in-depth into it here. You can read about it at length. But frankly, when we took a look at the study, it did what you thought it would do. So take that for what it's worth. Before I talk about the maxes, this is a joke or quip that I like to use a lot. I play golf nearly nonstop. You should be able to see a bunch of golf stuff in my background. When you hear max in the golf world, it's the most forgiving and for the worst players. Little bit different than when we're talking about max with Google. PMax and AI max, while quote unquote simple in the sense that you don't have to do a ton for maintenance, they're some of the most complicated to set up and one of the things that we have to pay the most attention to. So going back to PPC survey results, again, the challenges here weren't super surprising, but I want to unpack exactly what we can do about those. So advertisers lamented a lack of control, which frankly, I don't think people ever really had control. They're just lamenting that they can't push a room around a room. Improving performance, when there aren't that many levers to pull, there's not a lot you can do. Transparency, when you can't see a lot of data, you feel less comfortable with a lack of control, and you don't have as much to do with improving performance. But frankly, the thing that I hear the most from clients is in attribution and incrementality. Is Performance Max actually doing anything, or are we just moving food around our plate? It's tough to say, and that's one of those things that requires a lot more science, but we have some tips to help you tackle that. So again, answering the age-old question of how many conversions do you need? Unfortunately, the answer is a bunch. We saw that advertisers that had around 60 conversions going to Performance Max tended to perform the best. So again, we already went through it to some degree. Focus on getting your conversion volume up however you can do it. Just make sure that it maps back to back-end business data in a productive way, so you're not just inflating your numbers for funsies. So if you can inflate it, you'll likely see better results from PMax. I haven't seen a lot of great results from extremely low volume accounts for PMax. It's not saying you won't. It's just been a little bit more of a struggle. Now, what happens when you run PMax alongside different campaign types? Well, things get a little fuzzy. This is not surprising. There are very few advertisers who are running just PMax. I'm sure there are a lot more who are running no PMax. So what we're seeing is that the vast majority of advertisers are running, with PMax. And so unsurprisingly, that creates a little bit of what I'll call healthy competition. That is query showing in two places. Now, when we took a look, Optmyzr's data is confirming what Google is saying in the sense that your traditional campaigns will take priority over PMax. In turn, and I think this is where a lot of us search marketers stumble, that means that your PMax campaigns are going to look worse because your existing campaigns are already taking all the good stuff. Now, I'm not advocating for you to shut off everything, but you'll want to watch it closely, maybe a before and after period, maybe a geo holdout, something to measure the true value of PMax. Because we don't necessarily think it's stealing things, but again, things are moving around in the account a lot, which sort of hides your data and makes it a little bit tougher to interpret as to whether it's performing actual upside and doing anything or just taking credit for things that happen otherwise. We did our own data study, and we found that PMax cannibalizes search 97% of the time. That means that queries that you're bidding for that could show up in the search campaign are showing up in PMax campaigns almost 100% of the time. Do we care? How much do we care about this? Or are we just going to let good things happen and read and react? Frankly, what we saw is it's entirely okay if PMax, quote unquote, eats your search queries or moves them to a place that you don't want them. Conversion rate really didn't change. There were only a few isolated examples where our personal hand-built search campaigns performed a ton better. A couple examples where PMax won. But generally speaking, Google's making pretty good decisions. Rightfully so. We don't have a ton of data, so it's tough to trust them. But based on the data that we saw, when search queries are firing from different places, they tend to be firing from the places that are correct and are performing pretty well. Again, I said how much I hate best practices, but everyone asks, so I'll provide one for you, even though it's not actually a best practice. So it is really a best practice, but we did see certain structures perform better for certain things. For the best ROAS, we saw multiple PMax campaigns, each with a single asset group, be it product categories or product types or service types if you're using value-based bidding in your lead gen business. Multiple PMax campaigns to target each individual set tends to work better. For best CPA and conversion rate, that is getting the most things out of a single campaign, do exactly that. Run a single campaign with one asset group. The more asset groups that we started to introduce, it seems like Google is still learning a lot and it tends to underperform versus going with a single asset group. And as we talked before about queries and we'll call it steering, I frankly just wanted an excuse to use a GIF of a cat riding around on a Roomba. But I think a lot of us are trying too hard to push the automation around ourselves instead of letting it do what it's good at. Now, for people who complain about PMax, just overvaluing brand, well, funny enough, in our data, most advertisers are not using any sorts of exclusions. Admittedly, this data is a little bit old, so exclusions were a little bit new when we conducted this. But still, it's something that we would definitely want to do from a brand perspective. But from a performance perspective, it didn't really make a huge difference. Performance was really similar if you're using a brandless exclusion or not, or if you're using, negative keywords and placements. We're of course going to want to use those to get rid of junk, but again, performance isn't too difficult. So resist the urge, despite the fact that there's a cute kitty on top of your Roomba, of going down and pushing it around the room. Let it make decisions. It takes a degree of trust. I know it's uncomfortable. Google just wants to make money and they're out to screw us all and we all hate them. I know. Resist the urge because odds are high that you're just moving food around your own plate. As we talk about incrementality, these changes, while certainly do them from a branding perspective to make sure that you can control the messaging that you want, from a performance perspective, really not a huge difference. But funny enough, the opposite end of that surprised me a whole lot is that audience signals don't really do a whole lot. We're kind of getting an indication that Google doesn't rely on them a whole lot. So test with and without audience signals to see if they work well. We didn't see a huge impact when we looked at data in mass. And asset choices, again, we went through this a good deal before. Funny enough, we saw the best performance from people who were only running text ads, which at that point, it's just AI Max, which we'll talk about in a second. So instead, you want to make sure that you can balance your assets based on goals. If you're prioritizing search and want to use PMax as a way to expand your volume, frankly, you could just use AI Max. But test text heavy ads. Otherwise, let PMax do its thing. Let it do what it's good at. Let it clean your house like a little Roomba and do as good as it possibly could. So again, we left an action plan here for PMax control. I won't call this a best practice, but you can say this as a little cheat sheet as you're looking at how you can optimize your PMax campaigns to making sure they're as valuable as possible and working as best as possible. So I mentioned AI Max. I know it's young. I've done a lot of anecdotal research, and I've certainly had a lot of conversations with my peers and some of our Optmyzr customers. AI Max seems amazing. It's okay. It's not just mug you with a dartboard, throwing things blindly and seeing queries go crazy. It seems to function somewhat similarly to broad match and to a lesser extent DSAs, but with a little bit more of a stretch, and you're seeing a little bit more squirrely queries since there's a higher audience matching component, seems to be. In terms of queries, we saw a heavy focus on competitor matching. AI Max tends to do a lot of near me and localization stuff, a lot of similar meaning terms. but really tends to lean in heavy into advertising on competitor terms. So if that's something you're consciously doing or consciously not doing, you might want to temper your expectations with AI Max. In general, it's been okay. Performance has been pretty steady. Most of the advertisers that I've seen it have done pretty well with it. It tends to do better in more generic areas. If you're a niche business or a very specific kind of a vendor that sells a very specific type of clothing, for example, probably not for you. But if it's a marketplace or something a little bit more generic or a more easily understandable category, works pretty well. Feels a little bit like PMax to me. It's a delicious cake that got taken out of the oven a little bit too soon, but I expect this will get a lot better over time. Demand gen, again, since this is something that advertisers tended to hate, I will leave this with you as a quote unquote best practice, but I think if I were to summarize this slide in one word, it would be a little broad. We'll have a natural affinity or a natural tendency to want to go as specific as possible, but that can make demand gen make some kind of iffy decisions, can shrink your audience pool a little bit too much. The thing that we really struggle with demand gen is creative. You have to manage demand gen from a creative perspective, like you would manage something on Meta. You're going to have to change your creative extremely often. Remember, you're reaching a small, concise audience here. So if your creative doesn't get changed up very much, and you're talking to the same audience, they're going to get salty. Heck, I spent most of one of my prior keynotes for SMX Advanced talking about how salty I was that nobody does frequency capping. And so in demand gen, it's extremely important for you to vary your creative very, very often. I don't want to give you a threshold, but I would say at least every couple of weeks, which is going to make demand gen, frankly, more demanding for people to manage. But I think the reason why a lot of search advertisers don't like demand gen is because it's different for us. Demand gen was designed to be a competitor to Meta, not necessarily to be in addition to search. It's designed to generate demand. Performance Max is designed to perform. So that's okay. In demand gen, you're going to have to really keep a close eye on it and keep a close eye on your back end. Demand gen is awareness and maybe a little bit of action, but more awareness. You're going to have to measure well beyond the last click. Most advertisers that I've seen who are having success with it are using engaged view conversions to measure the impact of video placements. No, it's not Google overcounting. It frankly means it's giving more credit to the top of the funnel than the bottom. And last but not least, is it okay if your automation is wrong? Now, this might seem like a weird image to use for this, but this was my logout image for my bank account for the longest time. This just looks like a nice image for a bank. I happen to know that it is I should know this, the Philadelphia, I believe it's the Commodities Exchange. I know that it's extremely relevant to me. If this image is wrong, it's okay. It just looks like a nice bank. Now, we want to make sure that we hold automation accountable. It's difficult to trust Google when it's sort of a black box, when everything is hidden, when we don't have a ton of transparency to exactly what it's doing. Now, that's why we came up with a term that we like to call automation layering, which is basically insurance for paid search. Put simply, it's having one automation check on another. Optmyzr has a lot of built-in features. Scripts exist. You can do things with Zapier. You can set up Slack alerts. You can have things in your CM and your backend. But you want to make sure that you are monitoring automations to make sure that they're doing what they're supposed to be doing and to make sure that they're firing correctly. You want to alert yourself to volatility, look for pops and drops or alerts for big moves up and downwards. And make sure that when you do have those big pops and drops, that the automation that initially caused them knows that they exist and is going to respond correctly. This old quote from IBM, which is a little ironic given our current state, but a computer can't be held accountable, so a computer shouldn't make a management decision. Let's hold computers accountable a little bit. So I know I beat up best practices a little bit. So just like Elf, as we're coming into Christmas season, it's really easy to claim something's the best when it's just average. Now, the last question that I get a lot, and I'm shocked by how many people are awful at this. But of course, so many people want to know, how much time does AI actually save us? But they can't say where they're spending their own time. Love, all that is holy in this crazy, ever-changing world where we're going to be trying all sorts of stuff to solve our processes. Please, please track your time and track it, as religiously as is reasonably expectable. Figure out how much time you're spending on certain tasks. Figure out if they're worth automating. Figure out if there's something you want AI to take over. Or figure out if there's something where it's such a low lift for you that you want to make sure that you can provide as much value. Only way you can do that is by keeping a close eye on your time. And so with that, please remember, while I've given you a whole number of insights and a lot of different ideas, and a lot of understandings of what we've seen works best in mass, remember that everyone's unique. There are no such thing as best practices. There's only really good strategies. Thank you very much for attending, and please enjoy the rest of the sessions.